And so we all know how this goes. Without any further ado, let's cue the music and start that word chat.
Hello, everybody. Welcome again to that word chat. So happy to have you here. This is our annual Word of the Year show. It's one of the most interesting, fun, and complex shows that we do. It's just an hour. We're going to try to get done in an hour so you can go to dinner or go to bed if you're in Europe, like some of our international panel of lexical superstars. In the next hour, we're going to discuss dozens of words that captured the spirit, the zeitgeist of the previous year, especially some that were put forward by the specific organizations that many of these people represent. So we have a lot to get through. We're going to make it up as we go. It's going to be fun. It's going to be unscripted. If you have questions, ask in the room. We'll try to get to them if we can. But that may cause us to go to 5:33 or something like that. So be warned. There's tons of rizz in this room right now. I want to start with quick introductions, and I'll try to make it very quick. We'll go in alphabetical order. Start with Grant Barrett, who's been on the show before. He was on one of our very first episodes. Grant is head of lexicography for dictionary.com. He's co-host with Martha Barnett of A Way with Words radio show. And good to see you again, Grant.
Hi, Mark. Just actually promoted today to director of lexicography. So moving up in the world.
Lexicography.
It sounds fancy. It just means I'm further away from the fun parts.
All right. All right. Well, we'll try to make it fun here for you. Congratulations. So Grant has not done the Words of the Year panel before. He has been on the show before. We have one person brand new, and that's Greene, who's language columnist and Spain correspondent for The Economist. He's the author of a couple of, Talk on the Wild Side and You Are What You Speak. Right? You Are What You Speak, yes.
Yep.
And writes the language column for The Economist. Happy finally to meet him in person.
Hi.
And you're coming to us from Spain. From Madrid. Excellent. Okay. Like you said, international, but you don't have the Spanish accent.
No, not yet.
Returning to the panel, Fiona McPherson, senior editor, Oxford English Dictionary.
Hello.
And Fiona still in was it Munich?
Yeah,
Munich.
I'm in Munich.
Got it right.
Truly international. We have
yes, and as I joked last year, you can tell by the German accent.
Exactly.
Germany, Spain, England. Lynne Murphy, professor of linguistics at the University of Sussex in England, and every year Lynne selects the most the crossover words of the year from U.S. English to UK English and vice versa. So good to see you, Lynne.
Hello.
Gwendolyn Nichols is publishing manager at Cambridge Dictionary, and that's an English dictionary, but you're in New York?
I'm in New York. It's an international dictionary.
All right. Okay. Good to see you. Let's see who else. Oh, we've got from Merriam-Webster, Peter Sokolowski. And I didn't see him come in at the beginning, so I figured he was just going to be like a last minute thing. I guess we'll get him a little bit later, unless he's off doing something else. Maybe he found something better to do. Then we have two folks from the American Dialect Society, Kelly Wright, sociolinguist, and sort of a watcher of new words for the American Dialect Society. And we just found out Paper of the Year winner, which is, exciting for people in the academy. And where are you located, Kelly?
I'm in Blacksburg, Virginia, Virginia Tech.
Virginia Tech, right? Okay, excellent. And let's see. Oh, and then finally, our most active guest. He's appeared in at least 6 shows, maybe 7.
I've lost track. I don't know. 7 sounds good though.
Let's say 7. And Ben is involved in anything to do with the words. You see Ben's fingerprint there. So welcome, Ben Zimmer.
Great to be back.
All right. Let's jump right in. So the people on the panel come from organizations that, using various criteria, pick a word that best represents the preceding year, and the criteria is different, and we'll ask them to sort of explain the criteria as we go. Seems like artificial intelligence, and specifically ChatGPT, in the past year, they've been the big buzz. They've required us to come up with new language to describe a new field. And 2 dictionaries, this usually doesn't happen, but Cambridge Dictionary and dictionary.com both chose hallucinate. So let's start there. Wendy, Grant, I think Cambridge was first, right? And then Grant was the one dictionary.com just copied, right?
Yeah. So Grant, I can't imagine. I think that being the ones that saw us when we announced, and I know how long it takes to prepare the PR campaign, and you can't pivot and pick your second guess at that point. You just have to run with it. So sorry for stealing your thunder. But
I'll send you a royalty check.
Yeah. I think we our teams independently chose the same word for a reason. And I think that it's evidenced by, you and I and others here also gave speeches at different conferences over the past year over the effect of GPT, and hallucinating was a huge part of looking at strengths and weaknesses. What's the threat? What do we do with this thing? And so for us at Cambridge, you asked about criteria, Mark. We're always looking for, of course, driven by data and lookups, which we're always looking at statistically, although we don't just automatically choose the word that was most looked up every year. But that's a factor. Zeitgeist is obviously a factor. And the other one is, what is it that's going to highlight what we do actively as a dictionary for learners of English about explaining words. And so every year what's happened is we go back and say, wow, okay, there's a whole family of terms now that we've got to revisit the definitions for, update, add. And so along with hallucinate, we were adding like a countable sense of AI, like an AI, instead of just the idea of artificial intelligence. And we were adding prompt engineering, and just a new tweaking the senses of prompt, another sense of train, right? So for us, we're all wrestling with what it means to almost compete with, right? AI could be an existential threat to dictionaries. And so part of what we're also trying to do is to help people understand that it's garbage in, garbage out with these LLMs, that what they're trained on matters. And because they do pattern recognition rather than strict actual knowledge, as our expert, Dr. Henry Shelvin, pointed out, and in a video that Heather will link to, really cool. He's an AI ethicist, right, at the University of Cambridge. And so there are all kinds of ethical issues around this. So it just seemed like an obvious thing for us.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned LLM as another word, that large language model that came up on lists of words of the year. But you mentioned lookups, and So did you add this sense of hallucinate to Cambridge
Oh yeah,
Dictionary?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, yeah, we
Yeah.
did.
And
We absolutely did.
dictionary.com Grant, is that is that new definition part of your dictionary now?
Yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah, we intentionally, like Wendy said, all of us who do the WOTY start early in the year and basically start when last year's contest ends. So as soon as AI started to be a notable thing at the beginning of this year, we started working on AI entries. I mean, actually it started in 2022, but really became a public facing, consumer facing thing earlier this year. Yeah. So pretty much all the terms that Wendy listed, we've been working on as well. And a few others, cleaning up stuff. You get in there and you realize, yeah, chatbot is a whole nother thing now than it was in the 90s. So you update that definition that hasn't been updated since the 90s.
Oh yeah, chatbot. I never really thought about that, but that's a huge,
Yeah,
huge
we updated
change.
that one too.
Yeah. So some dictionaries aren't as nimble as maybe you guys though. Do any other dictionaries have that sense of hallucinate, for instance?
Not
I think
yet.
I think
No.
everyone's Peter is just now clocking in, but I think Merriam-Webster has it. But yeah, I would expect everyone to have it soon.
Yeah.
Anyone who's still actively updating their dictionary, right?
Well, and that's a smaller
Sure.
and smaller list.
It's a
as the years
smaller
go
and
by.
smaller
That's
group
fine.
of us. to
We
be
have
sure.
them
It's a
all in
fair
this room
question.
pretty much. So.
We kind of do. But yeah, you have to stay relevant,
So
full stop.
yeah, so Grant, what was the reaction when you saw that Cambridge went with hallucinate? Was it like,
Well, I was like, damn it, Wendy. No, but just like she said, it makes perfect sense. Like anybody who was watching the news and watching the language reacting to the news that kind of reflected the preoccupations of the year couldn't help but consider a whole batch of AI terms. AI as a whole category was up year over year. Even just the terms artificial intelligence on our website was up 89% year over year. And hallucinate and hallucination together were up 46% over the year on dictionary.com. So we had data. And then I threw in some stuff for the rest of the team to consider, like prompt and prompt engineer and large language model. And although we've updated our entries, nobody else was really as keen on that. I did propose the word that we now have an entry for, actually, that eventually was the ADS word of the year that Ben can talk about and Kelly can talk about in a bit. But I couldn't, as a family general use work home dictionary, I couldn't persuade anyone to go for that. So.
And we have a fine history of swearing on this show because we're on
I just
Zoom
didn't want to take the thunder. Kelly and Ben might relish that moment to say it first.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Kelly, Ben, what was the ADS word of the year?
Kelly, why don't you go ahead?
You should do it because it's your face.
Okay, yes, our choice was enshittification. We could talk about all the various winners in different categories. Kelly was fielding nominations from the public, and based on that, we created a couple of new categories, including an AI category.
That's right.
All just AI-related things.
Right.
And enshittification also won for digital word of the year because it comes from online use, specifically the writer Cory Doctorow coming up with that term to describe what happens to online platforms like Twitter/X,
Right.
which definitely taking a turn for the worse. So instead of things getting better, Cory Doctorow was kind of analyzing the market forces and the other things at play that happen with these platforms that just seem to be getting worse and worse. And so he came up with enshittification. He blogged about it at the beginning of 2023, and you could just see over the course of the year, people picked up on it right away. They embraced it. It's sort of this neologistic success story where you can see it's memorable. You don't forget it once you hear it once. And then people were applying it to various other situations and contexts. So it was endlessly adaptable. So it all had all the hallmarks of a successful neologism. And so that ended up coming up on top. And yes, it's great that Grant already has a dictionary entry over there at dictionary.com for enshittification, defining it, even if he wasn't able to really, go public with it as much as the American Dialect Society was able to.
Right, right. Enshittification, is it in Cambridge yet?
Oh no. And that's actually where we end up every now and then differing, from the native speaker dictionaries, because we are still a dictionary for learners of English. We are the largest one on the planet, but we are still mindful of parents, teachers, coming in and saying, really, so, but the thing is that we have all kinds of words that might be considered offensive. It is a dictionary that is used much more broadly, but in terms of all of the things that are competing for my lexicographer's time, important things to add, that's a word like that is just like down the priority list for us. Yeah.
Well, and there's something to be, I would think that has some sticking power, but I think there's something to be said for, the Merriam-Webster sort of criteria and other dictionaries, I'm sure. You're reluctant to put a word in the dictionary. We're talking about online now, and it used to be print, and it used to be a different species. But you don't want to put a word in and then find out 2 years later that nobody's looking it up because it's not relevant anymore.
Well, you're right. It doesn't matter as much. I don't know if that was directed to Peter or to me, but
that is generally directed.
Yeah. Certainly we don't have to worry about, okay, if you put this word in, what word comes out, because you still have to fit it all into a 1,600 page book, or you can't charge $25 for it anymore. And, the printing press can't cut the thumb tabs. All of that is just irrelevant. You can just keep adding if you want to. Whether people come to that page and look it up is a different question. It might be, blow with the wind. It doesn't hurt us really to add that kind of thing, unless I end up with somebody from a school complaining. But
right.
That's the thing with a lot of these words, though, isn't it? They, even if they are flash in the pan, and I'm not suggesting this one is particularly, but even if they are flash in the pan, they made an impact at some point. And they're part of the whole story of language. So you can always make a case for it, even if, even thinking about last year and what our choice was, goblin mode. I don't know that that's really necessarily stuck around, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. That doesn't sort of disqualify it as a good candidate for a word of the year. And none of that does. It doesn't have to end up going in a dictionary, but it said something at the time, and it resonated at the time, which is why it was chosen.
Right, and goblin mode never actually was in Oxford. Is that correct?
No, it's not. No, I'm still going to say not yet, because if there's one thing I think we all know, let's not try and second guess language. Who knows what might happen, but it's not in yet. No.
Yeah. Enshittification is lasting power.
What? Sorry.
We've already seen some movement. Enshittify has a history that maybe Greene can speak to, but it's that of like, it's part of a process that we can see that it is becoming productive. And I would like to hope that services and businesses will, give us the value of the products, right? But the way things are going, I think it's going to be relevant to describe many processes.
Right.
Well, even a word like hallucinate is controversial because tech people hate it, that we're using that to anthropomorphize something that, why don't you just call it a bug? Why not, or a glitch? It's
making stuff up.
Yeah. And so there's that whole aspect to that can make something, a word like that isn't doesn't got any kind of scatological meaning, but it's still offending somebody or annoying somebody, controversial in a different way.
So talking about controversial in different ways, I finally didn't notice this. It completely escaped me before, but I went to the bottom of the dictionary.com article on all the words of the year, the word of the year, and then the other words they looked at, and I found out that there's a vibe of the year.
Oh.
So Grant, what is that all about?
It's about trying to claim space that no other dictionary has claimed. No, actually, vibe itself has been this rising term for the last few years, although obviously it's got much older histories that go back to kind of metaphysical religious movements in the 1800s and kind of come back up through the 60s, and it has undergone some transformations. But we noticed that vibe had some constant search behavior and constant lookups. And then we started thinking about what a vibe of the year might look like. I mean, as everyone here knows, everyone who is part of a word of the year vote, you always have this tension between actual lexical items and thematic items. We had this debate just again on Friday at the American Dialect Society Word of the Year vote, where some people want to talk about this is the year of context, or this is the year of genocide. And while those words were used, they didn't particularly pop up. And so vibe was one of those words that didn't particularly pop up, but eras did, which was our vibe of the year. And not just because of Taylor Swift, where people talk about, I'm in my pumpkin pie era. That's all I'm having these days. Or I'm in my jogging era. I'm all about like getting out every day and doing 2 miles or whatever. And obviously it's slangy, but it's a different audience than Wody. The people who are reacting to it on social media are different. And so it's good for business, and it's also good for reflecting the language in a different way, because although everyone loves our short lists, and I'm saying ours meaning everyone in this chat, people love our main choice, but they also like to look at the also rans. You're always looking for another way to draw more attention to other language that is also deserving. So shortlists do one job, a vibe of the year does another job. Who knows? We may come up with something else next time, just to do a cross section of the language and peer at it from a different angle.
So eras, did anybody else have that on their on a short list, or?
We had vibe check. We added vibe check this year.
Oh, vibe check. That's interesting.
Yeah. So just checking in on your mood, but not eras. Yeah.
Era ended up being nominated for American Dialect Society's Word of the Year, and it got some consideration in our most useful / most likely to succeed category. So yeah, they
didn't win, but
it was one of our top nominations, though, certainly in our top tier.
From what we got from the public, what we were talking about before, with a lot of people wrote in to say, how about era? Because it is interesting the way this old word is getting used in new ways. In my blank era, in my flop era, in my sleigh era, all these different eras, in addition to, of course, Taylor Swift's Eras tour.
Right.
And she acknowledged that, by the way, when she talked about the naming of the tour. She specifically talked about eras as a term that her fans were using.
Right.
So back to artificial intelligence. The Economist, Lynne wrote about ChatGPT as the word of the year. Now how does it work at The Economist? Is it sort of based on Lynne? You sit down and think of what words there were, or is there sort of a more of a process like at the dictionaries?
Yeah, that's a little bit of both. A lot of you have used we because I think it's more of a collaborative process. This is my column. It's a word I choose in my language column. So it's really up to me at the end. I have kind of dictatorial power in the choice, but I do crowdsource ideas. And so I send an email to all staff, which is a couple of 100 completely brilliant colleagues, and ask me what's on your minds in your field, in finance and technology around the world, because I need to fill a column with this. And so those kind of runners up all fill out my column. So I used some international examples, words from China and Nigeria, and then I looked at sort of finance and geopolitics. But it was really clear that this year was going to be the year of something AI. And what was kind of an unsatisfactory process of elimination. Clearly, AI was too old to say it's particularly 2023. I had colleagues suggest LLM, but I don't think that that abbreviation is in kind of wider use. Most people couldn't tell you what an LLM is. People suggested GPT itself, which is a specific acronym for generative pre-trained transformer. Again, something that's not exactly on every pair of lips. But what I noticed is that ChatGPT was just everywhere. And as we mentioned, I live in Spain, I live in Europe, and I hear taxi drivers making jokes about ChatGPT. I hear references to it on the radio in Spanish. It's a global hit. It's something that everybody is talking about. So the only qualm about it, of course, was a lot of people thinking that's a name, it's a brand or something like that. And people have this kind of naive idea that a proper name isn't a word somehow. Of course, it is a word. ChatGPT is a noun, just like any name. Lane is a noun. So with some qualms about that, and with some lobbying from some colleagues, which I just sort of faced down, I stuck with it because ChatGPT was clearly what everybody was talking about this year. And I feel like even if it doesn't, I feel it may go generic, just like we Google anything, even if we use Bing or DuckDuckGo. It could be a generic reference for all LLMs, or it may not succeed to that level. But it'll still be the year that generative AI came to everybody's front of mind, and that will have come through ChatGPT. So even looking back, unlike picking a slang word that can often be quickly effervescent, I remember the year that the American Dialect Society almost picked on fleek, and I feel like looking back, we all would have thought, oh yeah, that was big for 5 seconds. When we look back on 2023, and we didn't pick on fleek, by the way. I was one of the many people who panicked at the end and stopped that in its tracks. But when we look back on 2023, we will all remember ChatGPT. So, like I say, the name element made it somewhat unsatisfactory, but I feel pretty comfortable with it. And that said, if the word that has made me wish I'd picked it, though I did not, is enshittification. I think it's fantastic. I think it will be with us for some time. I think it's a real thing in the world. It's something people want to talk about. So hats off to ADS and enshittification.
Yeah, it's great that they're when you see that they come out at different times, and when they do come out, when these words of the year are announced, I get excited about thinking about that word and how it has changed in the year and how it reflects the year. And then somebody else comes out with something, and often completely different. And it's really the whole. That's why I'm glad we get to do this show, because we get to bring everybody together to talk about not just the word of the year, because it's probably impossible to pick one, but the words of the year. So, and did other organizations look at ChatGPT, the what's the word I'm trying to say? The product name, the brand as a possible word of the year? Grant's giving the thumbs up.
Yeah, we did, but we didn't give it much. We didn't give it much, just because you don't want to put a brand name in that spot.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That's why we didn't do it.
Right, and it wouldn't be in many of the dictionaries.
It looks like Peter is bursting to talk in front of his massive dictionaries.
Good to see you. Glad you made it, Peter. I was actually saying beforehand, I wonder if Peter will be from the radio, at the radio station, or in somebody suggested you might be somewhere in Europe sipping wine and listening to jazz. Listen here at Merriam-Webster.
Yeah, can you hear me? I just want to make sure. Yeah, okay. Because my laptop didn't work and wouldn't connect with my camera, so I'm using my phone. That's fine. I'm in the office, as you perceive. I will be recording radio right after this, yes, and sipping wine later. But I just want to echo. I mean, what Grant said, what Lane said, what Wendy said. I mean, the big story every single week of the year was AI. The fact is that in our data, the first half of the year still showed the word woke as being very, very high every single day. But we have two sides of the coin in our list, with the word authentic and then the word deepfake. And that sort of anxiety about AI is expressed in those two words. And even though authentic connects to other stories for sure, clearly AI was the driver. And authentic just makes me kind of think about other words of the year in the past. I mean, we have noticed for a long time that the most looked up words in our dictionary on a daily basis that are not connected to the news tend to be abstract words of Greek or Latin origin, words like integrity and paradigm and conundrum and ubiquitous. And authentic is kind of like that. It's like the word integrity in that it's an abstract word. It's a quality that people desire. we're pretty sure. My former boss, retired lexicographer John Morris, used to think that the word integrity was always high because everyone was writing it in their CV, in their cover letter. And so they were looking it up to kind of check on that. And, that's one way to use a dictionary. So but I also want to say, to respond also to the idea, as Wendy said perfectly, there's not enough room in a print dictionary for everything. That's always been a problem. But you've made me think that these words of the year sometimes are kind of like rings on a tree, right? They echo a certain time and a place, like on fleek, or think of the term .commer, which nobody uses anymore, but it's in our dictionary and it's redolent of 2001, and that was a really important term at that time. And if you read literature or news or history of that time, the term is in the dictionary and it's sort of enshrined in that way. But again, we're not limited to space in the online dictionary, so that makes the game completely different.
Yeah, it's interesting because the word of the year started at the American Dialect Society as a sort of a thing to say, hey, let's talk about words, let's sort of expand. And Peter will, or sorry, Ben will correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but the idea was let's sort of bring what we do out to a wider audience. But and then there's a commercial aspect for the Merriam-Websters and the Cambridges to market themselves with it. But it really is an interesting. I mean, if you look at the history of it, not just what we look at every year. If you go back and look at the history over the past 20 or 30 years, you really do get a sense of change and cultural change.
Well, I'm just going to end with one comment. This is our 20th anniversary. I know that the American Dialect Society is the granddaddy of all words of the year, and it's such a great concept. But our first word of the year was 2003. And, we've learned a lot about how the online dictionary kind of reacts to data. That is to say, like, there are terms that we've learned are evergreen terms that can show up every year. And so we've refined our process to reflect that.
Okay, Ben, do you want to tell us where did word of the year? How did it get started?
Well, we owe it all to the late Alan Metcalf. We're very sad that Alan passed away in a year or so ago. Yeah. So, but it was really his idea back in 1990 as something to give a little publicity for the American Dialect Society. He thought, well, if Time Magazine can do a Person of the Year, why can't we do a Word of the Year and put out a press release? And that was it. And, the group was much smaller then. It was just, probably 25, 30 people in a room. Now, as saying, it was 300 or 400 this year. We also get we meet at the same time as the Linguistic Society of America, a much larger group. And we get lots of particularly young scholars. That's one thing that's been great in the decade or so that I've been doing this as sort of chair of the New Words Committee. And folks like Kelly have joined us and have really livened up the proceedings quite a bit. We get to hear from a lot of sort of different perspectives. Those of you who might have joined us for the Zoom years, the 2 years we did it over Zoom because of the pandemic. That was great just for sort of opening up the doors and letting people see how this all goes. And again, hearing from many more voices. And since Kelly has come on board, we are getting the insights from all of these sort of public nominations, and which Kelly runs into spreadsheets to see what people are most interested in, which really helps us from being too insular in our view and really thinking about, well, what are people really talking about these days? Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, all of that I think has been, great in terms of making this event continuing to be sort of responsive to, the changing times and the changing language.
And I'll just say, like, someone made the point that also RANs are getting attention. They're very interesting. It is in this tradition of, we have our nominees, they change, we keep our processes the same, but we have this data that shows us, 200-300 words a year that people nominate that filter out. I mean, some of them are, neologisms, like ways that they refer to the things that they do or people they think are stupid. But I think that's interesting. We get the full range of things that fit all the trends we've been talking about. And then people saying like, hope is my word of the year because it was a difficult year for me. And I think all of that's actually really informative and interesting. So
yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, it must be fun to go through that list. Speaking of this is a good time we have a clip. We have a special thing, new technology. We've got a clip of last year's Word of the Year discussion, and where we heard from Kelly and Ben and John Kelly from dictionary.com about a word that year that didn't end up making it, but was interesting. So let me share my screen, and it's very quick. So
what Mignon was saying about like all of these people from LinkedIn being in the business community and things like that, many of the people who chose to share their information because it was optional with us were high school students. So we had a lot of younger folks who participated in our surveys. So, although it was open to many people and we shared it with lots and lots of communities, the people who chose to nominate in our group were younger folks. So we got a lot of younger words in our sample.
Another example of that, not just OC, but also rizz was very popular among the younger folks who were submitting words. So rizz, which is kind of a clipping of charisma, spelled R-I-Z-Z, really took off in the past year to refer to effortless attractiveness or style, or seductive drawing power. Yes,
potential.
Seducing power.
Really
Rizz.
one to watch. That's one that kind of has some of those hallmarks of classic slang.
Oh, rizz is great.
Really
Yeah.
eager
Yeah.
to see whether
Zaddy has lots of rizz.
I have a question though.
So that was whoops. So that was where I first heard the word rizz was here on that word chat, and now it got some attention this year.
Yeah.
So yeah, Fiona was Oxford's word of the year.
Yeah, that's very neat segue. And I did this last year. I have completely forgotten that was that whole conversation about rizz. So there you go. It just shows in this job when you're working with words, they kind of can sometimes go in one ear and out the other. But yeah, we chose rizz, as you said. We did consider an AI word because, as everyone's been saying, it's been the story of the year, and it would be remiss not to think about it. But what we did this year was we chose 8 words based on the data that we could see in our corpus, which said something about the year, to some extent or another. And prompt was the one that we chose from the AI world. What I think we liked about that, just quickly before I get on to this, was that so much of the conversation around AI is about its potential and for independent thought, and the fact that it's maybe even, if you want to go that far to say it's putting human existence in jeopardy. But prompt is very much a kind of human-centered one. It's about the human agency of what you put into it, the thing that you write, the instruction you give it in order to generate the comment. So that was one that we did definitely think about, as was hallucinate. It unsurprise you to learn that. But in the end, I think we decided to go with something a little bit different. We did a vote for these 8 words, and that narrowed it down to 4. And then we looked at these and decided to choose which one we liked best, which one we thought resonated, which one we thought was interesting, and rizz was the one that we chose. As Ben actually said there, it's got, well, I'm going to say Z because, I'm British, but who doesn't like a word that's got ZZ in it? It immediately kind of, brings it to the fore. And the fact that it is a young person's word, it's one that's used more by the younger generation. That meant that a lot of people said, oh, well, we've never heard of it. That's a young person's word, as if that's somehow a disqualification. But, no one has guardianship of the language. All words were uttered for the first time at some point. I like to think that, back in the 1700s, people were throwing their hands up in the air about all these newfangled new words that were coming in. And, now they're words that we use all of the time, so we don't think of them as new words. But, in fact, they were. So I kind of like that. It's not a generation gap, but that also, I think, attracted us to the fact that this was a word which was very much associated with a particular group of people. And, as the song says, they're our future, the young people, sort of kind of changed the lyrics there a little bit. And you know, that's part of what part of the whole word of the year thing is about, really. I think it's something that we all enjoy, although I'd love to have the power that you had, Lynne, just to pick whichever word you wanted to pick. That would be the dream. But you know, it's a way of getting people talking about words, thinking about words. I really like the idea that some people, as you said, Kelly, thought about hope because that spoke to what they wanted. That's just as much a word of the year as any of the stuff that we talk about. But from a lexical point of view, rizz also appealed because we like nothing better than to try and talk a little bit about the way words are working. And the fact that it's coming from the middle of the word charisma, which is still fairly unusual formation in English. You know, normally you just clip the end of a word, you know, and use it that way. That also was interesting for us. So it kind of spoke to that lexicographical part of us, as well as just being a word that, I don't know, it's kind of quite fun to talk about, really. So it was nice to do something slightly different than choosing an AI word, while I think still acknowledging the fact that given that was in our short list, that was definitely a big topic and had to be reflected in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if you ever think about the power that you have, or the effect that you have on the language when you pick a kind of youth word, where I've often told people, if you hate a word that your kid says, start using it, and
they'll stop using it immediately.
And there's almost no greater way to sort of crown a word with adult authority than for Oxford dictionaries to make a word of the year. And I wonder if you think about, like, do you hasten its exit, probably inevitable exit from the scene, because slang does this. As you pick words like that.
Yeah, it's the way it works, isn't it? There's nothing like, making a word uncool by, people using it who didn't really want to use it or weren't expecting to use it. But that's the point about dictionaries anyway. Whether rizz will go in to any of the Oxford dictionaries or not, I don't know. It's probably a little bit early to say. I'd say the chances are good because it's a noun. That's the one that we chose, but it's also being used as a verb. I think it probably has potential to branch into other parts of speech as well. But we're always coming up after the fact. Any dictionary is. People have to use the word before we're going to put it in, whether you wait longer or you put it in more immediately, depending on what each dictionary does. That will depend. But it does kind of make people think, well, if my parents are using it, maybe I don't want to. I don't know.
I think Kelly and I both wanted to add a footnote to this discussion. In that clip from me from a year ago, I shared the conventional wisdom that rizz comes from charisma, from that middle syllable, and Fiona said that too. But when Kelly and I and the rest of the folks who work on Among the New Words, our quarterly feature for the journal American Speech, the Journal of the American Dialect Society, we considered rizz among the various nominees from 2022. And through that research, discovered that Kai Cenat, who is the streamer on Twitch and YouTube, who was the one to popularize it, when asked about it, said, no, it does not come from charisma. He just says he kind of made it up as a word that sounds good, and everybody assumed that it came from charisma. But it's fascinating. I mean, you could say, okay, well, he came up with it, but then everybody else says, oh, rizz, charisma, I get it. And maybe there was something in the back of his mind thinking about charisma. But then, when we wrote it up for Among the New Words, we had to put a little note and said, well, Kai Cenat says actually it doesn't come from charisma, even though that's the accepted theory of its origin.
Interesting. It's reminding me slightly of the whole GIF thing.
Right.
It's like, sorry, but if that's what more people are saying, then that's kind of the pronunciation that's
exactly. Right. The person who originated the word pronounces it GIF. Is that correct?
Yeah,
is that,
that's right.
But everyone wants to ignore him because it's
almost no one else does. So, oops. You can bring a word in, but you can't control what people are going to do with it.
I'm interested in the kind of role of prominent people. It doesn't have, people often think that words must have kind of a birth date and an obvious origin story, and everybody in this group knows that that's not usually the case. But I heard a story at dinner tonight, and it's almost too good to be true, but maybe it is, that Stephen Fry at a BBC interview said, "Oh, my mic doesn't have a waffle on it," and he meant the little thing that kind of protects it from from plosives and didn't know what to call it, and that the BBC staff assumed he knew what he was talking about because he's a sort of educated, erudite, articulate guy, and started calling it a waffle, and that the word spread from there. You know, it's fairly rare that you know, a single person kind of puts their thumb on the scale of history and gets to make a word happen. But it sounds like we have a case like that with rizz, and I'm reminded of blurb, which was just coined as a joke nonsense word to mean the, you know, a few praise on the back of a book. But we don't have that many words with, you know, kind of with inventors. And Ralph Keyes wrote that book on coined words a couple of years ago, which I wrote about at the time, because it shows you how rare that really is, that some lone person just makes up a word.
It'd make our life easier if it did, you know. Let's think about that.
Right. For enshittification, you know, we're ascribing it to Cory Doctorow, even though people were using forms of this before him. But he was a prominent person that people listened to and you know, read. You know, he wrote a blog post. The blog post turned into an article in Wired, and that kind of like snowballed from there, in part because Cory Doctorow is someone that people listen to on these sorts of issues. And his sort of framing of the whole, you know, idea of enshittification is what really helped it to succeed. So it really does help to have someone prominent like that.
Definitely. Popularization is a really useful word, I think, when we're talking about
also, I mean, it was I didn't look at those earlier uses, but was it more general?
Yes,
like,
for sure.
You know, somebody came to the party and just enshittified it, you know.
Exactly.
Speaking of the you mentioned rizz as a verb. So how would you rizz up a place?
Oh, like rizz up?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So kind of to chat someone up, to, you know, try and seduce them, that kind of thing, I think. Yeah. Usually with up, rather than, I don't know, I can't really think about how you would use it without up, but you know, I'm too old to be the one who's really using this.
I think we had some examples of just transitive rizz in our data as well, right? In addition to rizz up as like a phrasal verb, right? To rizz someone as opposed to rizz up someone.
To rizz them up, yeah. That would make sense. You see, you can just tell I'm clearly not of the generation who can just rizz this word up. No, let's not.
Lynne, does your daughter use rizz? You're muted.
No, she said she'd never heard of it.
Yeah, you know, actually, it's funny Grant mentioned that, because I actually I saw a reference to the age of your daughter. She's a teenager, and I thought, you must be now at the point where you're getting, you know, like Ben does with his son, getting feedback on the words of the year from the young people, the lingo that's going on there. So, but yeah, let's stay with Lynne, and because Lynne every year does the crossover word of the year. Lynne is an American based in England who observes the language sharing. And so what did you discover about words going from America to England and England to North America?
I found it a bit hard this year. There weren't any obvious candidates. But what I came up with, for US to UK words, of course, there's a lot of traffic of American words to Britain. But what I tend to pick out is something that made the news in some way. And so for that reason, I went with okay, which of course is an old word. It's been used in the UK since, you know, shortly after the war, maybe during the war. But the reason why I picked it this year was because of the news stories around a study that was done that found that British and American people use the word right differently when they reply to things. And Americans use okay like British people use right, and British people use right like Americans use okay. And so the Daily Mail ran with that and encouraged British people not to say okay, because you trick Americans into thinking you're smarter if you say right.
Your Daily Mail, yeah.
So I went with okay because of that. The British to American word of the year was a phrase, actually, if I'm honest, which is creeping in where to be honest has been in the past few decades. And what I found kind of interesting, that was recommended by Nancy Friedman, who I think is here, and seconded by Ben Yagoda, and the two of them are very helpful in helping me identify words of the year. But what I found interesting about my words of the year this year, as I was just reviewing them before we got together tonight, is that for the first time, there are no nouns and verbs in my words of the year. They're both sort of discourse markers. And what I think that's telling us is that a lot of the traffic these days isn't just about how we refer to things like jabs and quarantines and things like that from a few years ago, but rather how we're communicating and our styles of communication. And the other point that I thought was relevant was the connection between if I'm honest and Merriam-Webster's choice of authentic. Because again, like authentic, you shouldn't have to say something's authentic. It should just be unsaid in some sense. To be prefacing things with if I'm honest sort of, gives that feeling that, well, maybe I'm not always honest and maybe I'm not always authentic. So I think there's something in the water, something in the air these days about, that need to mark honesty where it's not always necessarily taken for granted.
I'm going to be very much listening for both those because those weren't something that I was familiar with. But you mentioned Nancy Friedman. Nancy wrote and hi Nancy, glad you're here. Nancy wrote a article for Strong Language, a strong language blog, about all the sweary words in the American Dialect Society Word of the Year this year. A fair number of strong words. Is there a reason for that, Kelly? Is it the young people are more apt to swear, or where are we getting the swear words from?
Good question. We did not have nearly as many young people who participated this year. It was actually mostly middle-aged folks who actually report, because it's optional. The report is, the demographics are optional, but it was mostly middle-aged folks.
Do millennials count as middle-aged now? I'm wondering.
35 was our average age. Let me put it that way.
That's
so not middle-aged at all. Still
not middle-aged. That feels middle-aged to me. I like I'm living over 70. Okay. Yeah, but it's good. It's good. I think a totally different spectrum this year, which is interesting. So I'm glad we had a new handful of folks. And we only had 6 people that were in a language related profession. So I think that's something that's also different to like the adult sample we had last year was certainly more lexically inclined folks. And this year it was up from all over the place.
Can we really quick? Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to throw in, there's a brand new study by Robbie Love in the UK showing that just culture is much more sweary, or at least British culture is much more sweary over the last couple of decades. So I think it's, probably a much bigger phenomenon than young people.
Sounds right.
Can we go through I have it here somewhere, the ADS, the list of the winners and the categories. Do you want to just quickly run down those for us, Ben?
Sure. I'll do it in sort of the order that we did it on Friday night. We actually started with euphemism of the year. The winner there was structurally restrictive housing, which is a euphemism apparently used by the New York City Department of Correction because solitary confinement does not sound so pleasant, and so they've come up with that euphemism. Most creative word of the year, we have the Barbie effect here, but instead of a Barbie word, it was a Ken word, Kenaissance. So the Renaissance in the wake of the depiction of Ken in the Barbie movie. We also had things like Kenergy and Kenuff. And I guess this is kind of standing in for the whole Barbie phenomenon. We could have had an entire Barbie-related category had we wanted to, with Barbenheimer and Barbiecore and so forth.
Well, that would be good. I loved the Barbie reference because I just saw the movie for the second time, and I think the second time you see the movie, you realize the whole Ken side is so much more interesting. It's really about Ken. And so I thought
movie is
Kenneth,
about Ken.
yeah, and Renaissance. I mean, it's like it's not just. You know, I read a blog saying how could you not go with Barbenheimer, the combination of Barbie and Oppenheimer because they came out at the same time. But Renaissance has sort of a broader view of the masculinity and what it means, and you know, saying I'm Kenough.
Exactly.
Is
or Benough, that's what I say. But
Benough, yeah.
We mentioned that we had a special AI related word of the year category. Again, this came out of Kelly fielding nominations from the public and seeing how many there were. Instead of hallucination or ChatGPT or LLM, instead the winner was stochastic parrot, which is a term that was coined by Emily Bender, who was actually in the room with us. She's a computational linguist who is a great sort of AI skeptic. And she wrote a paper a couple of years ago where she and her co-authors introduced this term stochastic parrot to refer to these large language models that generate plausible synthetic text, but they have no actual understanding. And since the rise of ChatGPT, that has become a very useful term for people who want to kind of puncture all of the AI hype. And it was great to actually have Emily in the room with us to talk about it and how she came up with that. We also had an informal word of the year for slangy type words and phrases. And the winner there was let him cook or let someone cook. Allow a person to do something that they're good at without interference. And that was certainly... I heard that a fair bit in 2023, and I'm not sure exactly how old it is. I'm sure these things always seem to have a kind of a prehistory, but for sure it was something that I think took off in 2023.
Interesting. There are a lot of words that come out of the kitchen. I mean, somebody's cooking. They're having a lot of rizz, I guess. And, you know, Kelly, too many cooks in the kitchen, that sort of thing.
Kelly, I'm sorry. I'm just running through these quickly. Was there something you wanted to
No, I was, but yeah, kitchen, we're eating, leaving no crumbs. There's a lot of gustatory imagery this year.
Just a couple more categories. We had a political word of the year that was actually won by an emoji. Some years we have had a whole emoji of the year category. This year we didn't really have enough interesting emojis except for one, and that was the watermelon emoji being used in social media, especially to indicate solidarity with the Palestinian cause, basically. And there's a very interesting history, again, a food-related term here, but going back to the 1960s and the Six-Day War, where the Palestinian flag was actually banned by Israel. The watermelon, which has been associated with Levantine cuisine and Palestinian cuisine for a long time, ended up becoming this replacement symbol for the flag. And so we're still seeing this kind of interesting phenomenon happening where the watermelon emoji kind of stands for that. And so that actually won our political word of the year.
That also because it's red, white, green, and black, or
yes, also the color, the colors of the flag match the emoji as well. So visually it works. In situations where perhaps you wouldn't want to necessarily have the Palestinian flag, there's this whole kind of what's been called algo speak, these substitutions that people make because the algorithms are watching you. I will end just with the most useful / most likely to succeed category, which we combine since they tend to overlap so much. And Kelly, why don't you explain the winner in that category, which is derogatory in parentheses?
So derogatory in parentheses had quite a bit of conversation from the floor. It was nominated from the floor, so it didn't come from the public. And it's essentially an aside. So you might say something like journalist derogatory or senator derogatory afterwards. A normal noun, and someone is qualifying how they feel about it online.
But it's interesting because it's a part of this larger phenomenon that sometimes gets called tone tags, where because tone is often lost online, you put something in parentheses to indicate what your tone is. And so in some ways, derogatory is like that, except it's kind of ironic because very often you're adding it to something that doesn't seem derogatory to begin with, and it's kind of used for humorous effect. And then the people have been, using various other things like that, like, complimentary or whatever. But and according to the people who nominated it for Word of the Year, there are, folks who are actually using that in speech now. They're actually using that little derogatory tag as if they were adding it in parentheses at the end of something online.
It almost seems like the tag, the idea of the tag is more the, maybe that ought to be the word of the year, which would have the lasting power, because next year it might not be derogatory. It might be, irony wouldn't work, but, other things like that. So, and then enshittification was the final.
Yeah, it was one for digital word of the year. And then when we opened it up and said, please, come to the mic and, what would you like to nominate for overall word of the year? Because we went in with a ballot basically for all of these other categories. But we like to see how things emerge before we nominate for the main category. And so we had actually like about 10 nominees, and a lot of them came from those other categories. So we had Renaissance, we had Let Someone Cook, we had Stochastic Parrot, we had derogatory, but enshittification, which had won the digital word of the year, ended up triumphing over all of those other ones.
And what was it did go 3 rounds, right?
Yeah, we added a couple of runoffs just because there were 4 that were sort of close, and then we narrowed it down to 2, and so we sort of built it up. Derogatory, I think, actually came in 2nd place. I was really surprised because going into it, I wasn't paying attention to that at all. I think I, had seen people use it, but it wasn't really on my radar. Maybe it was for you, Kelly, but I was surprised it did so well ultimately.
Yeah, it kind of swept. It was nice.
Yeah.
121 votes in the final vote, 121 for derogatory and 158 for enshittification. So, we're oh my gosh, we're already past our time, but that's okay. We can keep going because I do want to ask you, each of you, what is the one word of the year that you would have chosen if you hadn't chosen your word of the year? Or what's your favorite? Maybe not what you would have chosen, but what's just your favorite? What really resonates with you? Kelly, you're on my screen. Let's start with you. What was your what word of the year did you like that wasn't chosen?
This is a good question. I think I'm going to answer with one from the nominees. We had someone nominate like a missed opportunity word, which was nay. So instead of X nay Twitter, instead of X formerly known as Twitter. And I will just say that I would have loved to have heard that this year. It would have been great if we were doing that, saving column inches, all of that, and bringing back a fun, gendered term for us to talk about. But yeah, so we'll just hold it in our hearts for another time.
I did not expect that. Let's go to Peter.
I really liked the word. Now, our word of the year is a statistical measure of the weight of lookups in the past year. One of the top lookups was a word that that you could summarize the year with, and that was dystopian. And I think there was a lot that was literal, like the wildfires in Canada and in Hawaii. There were also the discourse about AI, which was largely in the context of a kind of science fiction dystopia. And the year started with one of the most watched television shows, The Last of Us, which was usually described as a dystopian drama. And so here's a word that has unbelievable flexibility and utility. And it's also one of those great words with classical roots that is fun to express and explain. So for me, it would be dystopian.
Yeah. Excellent. And feel free if you're. Last year we did a poll of the room, and we don't have that set up. But feel free if you're in the jump in the chat. Give us your favorites, words of the year that out of the list we've talked about, or something else that you thought resonated for the year. Let's go to Wendelin.
It's funny because I had to just sort of look at my the list of things that we had also updated, because nothing immediately said, oh, well, if we hadn't done hallucinate, what would I have chosen instead? The other ones resonated for really good reasons, but just seemed a bit more narrow. So I'm actually just going to pick something that I saw my brother experienced months and months all over the course of this year, and that's range anxiety with his electric car.
Oh,
we added that word this year. fear that you're not going to have enough battery to last to get where you're going to go.
Great.
It's a fun one.
All right. How about Grant?
Well, hi. How much time do you have?
12 seconds.
Get a list.
12 seconds. Well, hold on. Let me call up my list. We all keep lists, right? We all keep a life list of this stuff. I can't find my list. My list is deep and large.
We can come back. We can go to.
Yeah, come back if you will.
We'll go to Fiona while Grant.
I'd probably pick one if it just been up to me that we had in our longer list, which was parasocial. It's not a new word. It goes back to like the 50s. So parasocial, sort of designating a relationship that where, you know, there's that sense of intimacy felt by a fan or a viewer, that they have a relationship of some description with, you know, a musician or an actor that they really like. And what I liked about it was the whole, it's a very kind of highfalutin kind of word for a really obvious phenomenon that I think most people could recognize. And of course, social media making it much ever easier to feel that you've got that relationship with someone because you can find out so much about them so easily, rather than having to wait, as in the olden days, for them to deign to do an interview or something like that. So I kind of like that slightly technical sounding word to describe something that I think we're all quite familiar with and doesn't seem quite so technical.
Yeah, that's very useful. How about Lynne Greene?
Well, I've already mentioned my enshittification envy. I think it was a great choice, and it really sums up a year that we all. And the reason dystopian was popular is because everybody felt like 2023 was pretty enshittified by lots of bad.
Here's the verb use.
But to be positive, I like to try to be positive. I like Merriam-Webster's authentic, and it's, of course, it's not a new word, and it's not even an old word with a new sense. It kind of means what it meant. But in the era of our anxieties about generative AI and just fake everything, fake news was our word of the year in 2017 or 16. You know, authenticity is going to be maybe the concept of the decade. It's going to be the coin of the realm, the most valuable thing you can have, something that you know is real, information you know to be true, or a piece of art that you know to have been created by the hand of a real living human artist, or live music as opposed to some crap generated by AI, or a piece of writing that has a voice and that you know to be written by a human being of original thought and not blurted out by an LLM. So I think authenticity is going to be a huge, not just a word, but a huge idea for us as we navigate machines' ability to just generate ever more stuff in the world.
Very cool. Lynne.
Well, I love all the words that were chosen and all the ones that people have suggested so far. So I'm going to go really, really personal and related to my choice of OK as US to UK word of the year, fair. So my daughter and my daughter's age group, she's 16. This is how they respond to anything you tell them. Fair. Fair. So that's where I'm living.
Well, give us an example.
I really think you should clean your room. Fair.
That's great.
My kid, you know, they're doing on this side of my kid's 20. He does the same thing, and the response is all doesn't mean that his room gets cleaned. It's like fair observation seems to be what they were like. I'll take that under consideration.
Okay, Ben.
Well, I would go with one that lost out to Renaissance in the most creative category. There was a New Yorker article in 2023 talking about what do we call our current era? And there are all sorts of creative choices for it. And if you know your geological time divisions, you'll know that there's the Holocene epoch that we've been living through. And so someone suggested that we are now living in the Assholocene era.
That was Nancy. I think.
Yes,
it was Nancy.
Yeah. So thank you to Nancy Friedman. She was on top of that when the New Yorker piece came out, and do look at Nancy's piece on strong language, where she goes through the sweary choices like Assholocene. But I thought that was great, and I guess it does go along with enshittification and kind of a bleak worldview our dystopian worldview that we're living through right now. But that resonated with me, I would say.
Yeah. All right, and then I think that's everybody but Grant. We get back to Grant. And
yeah, so this is not as fun as some of the other ones, but I have been keeping an eye on coded, which is an affix to mean like queer coded, gay coded, female coded. And although it's not new, you can find uses of black coded back, I believe, to the 70s. It really has taken a strong hold in certain kinds of discourse where people talk about their impressions of something as being, queer coded, although it doesn't explicitly say it's for gay people, or it's female coded, although a man could wear it too if it's clothing or what have you. So I love that as it's almost like the suffix wise, language wise, this is the most fun I've had since Friday. So it's kind of like that. It's just it means about or concerned with or related to, but not explicitly saying so.
all right, well, we're well over, and I knew we would be. I lied at the beginning when I said we're going to be done in an hour, but I appreciate it's been great fun, as Grant said. It's a blast to do this, and it's wonderful to talk to you and get your insight into the words that made 2023 what it is. We'll be back next month, and we've got some pretty cool guests lined up for the next 3, and we're not going to tell you what they are, but you can check it out on the website as I get ready to update the website in a few days, and come back and join us many times, and appreciate everybody being here and sticking around past the time. So thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.